John Lennon, the global icon of peace, privately harbored a brutal disdain for music's biggest stars, publicly savaging everyone from Frank Sinatra and Bob Dylan to the man he once idolized, Elvis Presley. From his disgust at what he saw as Hollywood sellouts to dressing down his rivals in scathing interviews, we are counting down the 5 legends Lennon truly despised. Hang on tight, because the war he waged against the musician at number 1 was more personal, vicious, and shocking than all the others combined. Number 5. Andy Williams. Kicking off our list at number 5 is the king of wholesome, family-friendly entertainment, Andy Williams. To understand Lennon's contempt, you have to picture the 1960s. Williams, with his warm cardigans and perfectly parted hair, was the smiling face of the mainstream establishment. His smooth, easy-listening sound dominated the airwaves, representing everything safe, predictable, and approved of by your parents. He wasn't just a singer. He was a cultural institution that rock and roll was created to destroy. For Lennon, Williams was the musical equivalent of a tranquilizer. John's disdain for Andy Williams wasn't personal, it was purely ideological, a battle for the soul of popular culture. Lennon famously loathed what he called muzak, or middle-of-the-road music, seeing it as a bland, corporate product designed to numb the senses. In his view, music was a weapon, a tool to challenge authority and awaken the mind, not a soothing background noise for a dinner party. Because of this, Williams' entire career was an affront to the very purpose of art, a sanitized fantasy that ignored the world's harsh realities. This ideological hatred allegedly had one visceral, though highly contested, flashpoint. The story originates from Fred Seaman, Lennon's personal assistant during his house husband years, a source whose credibility has been fiercely disputed by the Lennon estate. Seaman claimed that Lennon, whilst watching a saccharine Andy Williams Christmas special, flew into a tirade at the screen, mocking the plastic smiles and dead-eyed sentimentality. The incident vividly illustrates Lennon's core belief that this kind of entertainment was not just bland, but a dishonest performance of happiness. Ultimately, Lennon's one-sided feud with Andy Williams was the perfect symbol of the 1960s culture war. On one side, you had the clean-cut crooner representing the old guard's values of comfort and conformity. On the other, you had the sharp-witted rebel determined to tear the world down with feedback and brutal honesty. While Williams likely never gave Lennon a second thought, for John, he was the first domino to fall in the fight for cultural supremacy. Which side of that culture war were you on? Let us know in the comments. Number 4. Frank Sinatra. At number 4, we have a true heavyweight, a man who commanded as much respect and fear as Lennon himself, Frank Sinatra. Old Blue Eyes was the undisputed chairman of the board, a titan from a previous generation who defined masculine cool with a tuxedo, a microphone, and a glass of whiskey. He was a Hollywood power broker, a peer of presidents, and the leader of the Rat Pack. This wasn't just a musician. This was the old world establishment personified, setting the stage for a colossal clash of egos. To truly understand this feud, you have to know that Sinatra drew first blood decades before Lennon entered the stage. As rock and roll first exploded in the 1950s, Sinatra went on the attack with absolute venom, famously calling the new genre the most brutal, ugly, degenerate, vicious form of expression he had ever heard. He declared it was sung by cretinous goons and was a rancid-smelling aphrodisiac. These comments set the battle lines for an entire generation, painting Lennon and his peers as villains long before they even met. Lennon, never one to turn the other cheek, fired back with his signature wit and bile once he had a platform. While he would occasionally and begrudgingly admit Sinatra had a technically good voice, he absolutely despised the persona and the world he represented. According to multiple sources, Lennon privately dismissed Sinatra's music as being made for old drunks in tuxedos and considered his swaggering, tough guy image to be completely inauthentic. For John, Sinatra was the ultimate phony, a caricature of coolness. The great irony is that both men were uncompromising artists from working-class backgrounds who clawed their way to the top of the entertainment world. They were both icons who bent the industry to their will, yet they became symbols of completely opposing universes. Sinatra was the master of polished, sophisticated control, while Lennon was the champion of raw, chaotic expression. Their mutual disdain was a reflection of their irreconcilable worldviews, a cold war between two musical empires. Number 3. Bob Dylan. Sliding into our number 3 spot is perhaps the most complex and fascinating rivalry of John's life, his relationship with Bob Dylan. This wasn't simple hatred. It was a toxic cocktail of idol worship, intense jealousy, and bitter competition. Dylan was the one contemporary artist Lennon truly saw as a peer, and perhaps the only man whose lyrical genius he genuinely feared. Their relationship wasn't a feud so much as a psychological chess match played out on vinyl. In the early days, Lennon was completely in awe of Dylan. Hearing albums like the freewheeling Bob Dylan was an eye-opening experience, showing him that pop songs could be poetry, protest, and profound social commentary all at the same time. John openly admitted to going through what he called his Dylan period, writing songs like You've Gotta Hide Your Love Away in a direct imitation of his new hero's style. This hero worship, however, quickly soured once Lennon felt he had caught up to Dylan's artistic level. The turning point came when Lennon's admiration morphed into a bitter rivalry, fueled by his own insecurity. He began taking potshots at Dylan in the press, famously telling Rolling Stone that a lot of Dylan's acclaimed work was just, in his words, crap. When Dylan entered his Christian phase, Lennon was particularly merciless, mocking him as a preachy sellout. John felt that Dylan was no longer an authentic voice of the counterculture, but a phony prophet who sold out. Lennon's complicated hatred for Dylan was, in reality, a form of deep, twisted respect. He could only truly despise someone he saw as an equal, and Dylan was the benchmark against which he measured his own artistic worth. Number 2. Elvis Presley. And number 2 is the man who was arguably the reason John Lennon ever picked up a guitar in the first place, Elvis Presley. This story isn't just about professional disdain. It's a genuine tragedy about the death of a hero in the eyes of his most devoted follower. For Lennon, Elvis was more than a singer. He was a bolt of lightning from another world, a symbol of rebellion who showed a poor kid from Liverpool a way out. This makes his fall from grace in Lennon's eyes all the more devastating. It's impossible to overstate what early Elvis meant to John. In countless interviews, Lennon said bluntly, "Before Elvis, there was nothing." The raw, rebellious, sexually charged energy of Elvis's Sun Records recordings was the blueprint for everything Lennon wanted to be. This wasn't the polished crooner of his parents' generation. This was dangerous, exciting, and real. This version of Elvis was a god to Lennon, the untouchable king of authentic rock and roll. Lennon's adoration came to a sudden and brutal end. The turning point was when Elvis returned from the army and was effectively sold to Hollywood, trading his leather jacket for bland movie scripts and forgettable soundtracks. Lennon was utterly disgusted, feeling that his hero had betrayed the very essence of rock and roll by becoming a safe corporate product. He famously and repeatedly said that Elvis died the day he went into the army, a sentiment he never wavered from. This profound disappointment was solidified during the Beatles' legendary 1965 meeting with Elvis at his Bel Air home. Expecting to meet the rock and roll deity of their youth, they were instead met with a man who seemed bored and isolated, surrounded by his Memphis Mafia. The night was famously awkward, with Elvis barely speaking, leaving Lennon feeling completely hollow. He had met his hero, and his hero was gone, replaced by a wealthy, complacent movie star. Lennon viewed the later Vegas Elvis as the final tragic chapter in this story of betrayal, seeing him as a bloated self-parody. This disillusionment became a core part of Lennon's own artistic DNA, hardening his resolve to never sell out or compromise his vision. His hatred of the Hollywood Elvis was a constant, bitter reminder of the high price of fame, a cautionary tale that fueled his relentless and often painful quest for authenticity. If you enjoy deep dives like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button to keep hearing stories from rock and roll's best past. Number 1. Paul McCartney. And finally, at our number 1 spot, is the most shocking and deeply personal feud of John Lennon's life. The musician whose work he attacked with more venom and cruelty than anyone else was his own creative other half, his partner in revolutionizing music, Paul McCartney. This wasn't just a rivalry. This was a bitter, public war between two men who were closer than brothers. The breakup of the Beatles wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of their battle. The animosity had been simmering for years before the band officially split. Lennon grew to despise what he condescendingly called Paul's granny music, seeing his solo writing work as lightweight fluff that betrayed the Beatles' edgy image. He deeply resented Paul's attempts to steer the band after manager Brian Epstein's death, viewing him as a domineering control freak. The creative tension that once produced magic had curdled into genuine personal resentment. Once the Beatles were no more, The feud exploded into the public arena through their solo music. Paul's 1971 album, Ram, contained what Lennon perceived as subtle digs and condescending lyrics aimed at him and Yoko Ono. Paul later admitted that lines in songs like Too Many People were indeed directed at John, for a man with an ego as fragile and explosive as Lennon's. This was a declaration of war he was more than eager to escalate. Lennon's response was not subtle. It was a character assassination set to music. His song How Do You Sleep from the album Imagine is one of the most brutal takedowns in music history, with George Harrison even playing guitar on the track. Lennon viciously attacks Paul's talent, legacy, and characters with lines like, "The only thing you done was yesterday," and "A pretty face may last a year or two, but pretty soon they'll see what you can do." It was a staggering act of public cruelty. In his infamous 1971 interview with Rolling Stone, Lennon unleashed a torrent of unfiltered rage against his former partner. He systematically dismantled the McCartney myth, dismissing his contributions, calling his music Muzak, and blaming him for the band's demise. He was attempting to rewrite history in real time, casting Paul as a lightweight tunesmith and himself as the band's true genius and soul. The reason this feud was so much more venomous than any other was simple. It was rooted in a profound, complicated love. No one could hurt John more than Paul, and vice versa. Their rage was a direct reflection of the depth of their bond and the pain of their creative divorce. Years later, they would find a fragile peace, but the scars from that public war never fully healed, leaving a tragic postscript on the greatest songwriting partnership in history. From symbolic targets like Andy Williams to his own musical brother, John Lennon's feuds were a key part of who he was. They were born from his relentless, often cruel, search for truth and authenticity in an industry built on fantasy. This brutal honesty made him a difficult man, but it's the very same quality that allowed him to write songs that changed the world. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more untold stories from music history. What do you think? Was Lennon a truth teller or a talented bully? Let us know your final verdict in the comments. If you want to uncover more secrets of rock's greatest icons, check out our next video on your screen. See you next time!